This resolution is that this House supports police using drones. Observation 1, restless analysis, subpoint A. We're going to define this as a policy debate. Subpoint B, the term support favor. We're going to find drones as UAV, the unmanned aerial vehicles. They're going to be also unweaponized. And we're going to find this house as Los Angeles Police Department. Subpoint C, the plain text. The Los Angeles Police Department will accept Homeland Security grants for use of drones. Some specs of this is that the time frame will be immediately. The regulation is that image retained from the surveillance will only be used with reasonable evidence contained for crime or trial. Observation 2. Advantage number 1 is going to be increasing surveillance methods. The harms is that there is currently a lack of aerial surveillance and real-time aerial intel. Helicopters aren't fast, effective method for response times, and they are not stealthy, and they do cost a lot of money with the amount of gas that they're being exhausted. And so, also because of this, these drones provide very good detail with their infrared and heat sensors and radar technology. South Texas Police Department said that drones have led to being valuable for increasing hostage situation intel. So the inherency for this lack of surveillance and intel is that we are not currently, or the Los Angeles Police Department is not currently supporting the use of drones, and therefore we lack all this intel, or at least the Los Angeles Police Department lacks this intel. Solon sees that the plan allows for the LAPD to use drones for increasing surveillance methods. Now, we believe that this is very important for the following reasons I'm going to get to in the impacts. It's going to lead to increasing the effective and efficiency of using drones for surveillance, due to things for like hostage situations, in which LAPD is a very dangerous city in which they have a lot of hostage situations in the past. One example of this, when the Tosh.0 production guy was killed due to a hostage situation in which they shot him coming out of like a building, in which our drones can help solve for this because they can provide detailed aerial surveillance and use their heat sensors and use their also their infrared and all that technology to help provide better intel so that we can increase our efficiency in hostage situations. Also for like search and rescue when people going lost and missing in the forest. If people are, we could use these drones to help find these lost and missing people to increase the methods to finding them faster and helping them get the proper treatment they need if there are any type of injuries they had so that they could be safe. Also, this has been known to be good for drug trafficking, for when there's a lot of drugs in Los Angeles and trafficking going on. Using these drones are going to be a very stealthy method to help provide more intel rather than having a helicopter fly over buildings, which is very obvious to drug traffickers. Yes.
Can you discuss how and when these drones will be put into operation to gather surveillance?
They can be used and put into gather surveillance when people gone missing, when there's hostage situations, when they need more intel and they don't want to use a helicopter, or when they want to use the drone because it's faster and more effective than a helicopter for like emergency situations, which I'm going to get to advantage number 2. Advantage number 2 is going to be increasing response time. Harms is that their helicopters, like I mentioned before, aren't as fast as being responsive and providing real-time intel and for emergency responses, in which the FAR Tech response unit used aerial drones to help coordinate firefighters and emergency response teams for all of their emergency response calls. And they said in a statement saying that they really value and support the use of drones because it has led them to being able to better save lives because they can respond a lot faster and get real-time intel and imagery. And yes, you have a question.
Can you just give me some specific examples of how, of like what they would be responding to?
One of these examples are just generic. Anytime they need firefighters or emergency response, and they're trying to coordinate a route for like which is the fastest route, which is the fastest method to get from point A to point B for any type of response that they need, where a firefighter or emergency vehicle is being called into that action. And they felt that using these drones were important enough, so because it helps them get from point A to point B faster. And the inherency of this is that without using drones, you don't get this fast, effective, real-time intel as opposed to not using drones. Our solvency is that our plan is going to allow the LAPD to get this real-time intel because we're going to support them using drones. The impacts of this is going to increase the response time for emergency situations and getting there more effectively and faster, which is going to help to increase saving lives and increase finding injured people and helping them recover from whatever emergency response that they need, and just providing an overall effective response team from firefighters and ambulance. And those are all reasons why you support the LA Police Department using drones. Let's see. Also, just another statement was the South Texas Police Department said that using these drones were effective for emergency response times. And so, with that being said,
You have another minute. You want to run?
yeah, let's just run. All right, so advantage number 3 is going to be the environment. Helicopters, using a lot of overexhausting helicopters for situations, costs a lot of fuel, which is turbine fuel, and 25 pounds of CO2 and gallons being burned from using these helicopters. Inherency is that without LAPD using drones, they're going to have to only be able to use helicopters for any time they need any type of aerial surveillance. And the solvency is that our plan incorporates drones being used, which is going to lead to using less helicopters when the situation is not really called for, and they could be like, hey, let's just use this drone instead of a helicopter. So the impact is going to be increasing the environment because we're going to use less helicopter fuel and more of the electronic drones being used. So thank you.
That's all good. You rounded that out pretty nicely. I wouldn't want to.
Okay.
Okay, so just a quick off-time roadmap. I'm going to go off case and then on case. So I'm going to run 2 DAs and, a vagueness critique and then 2 DAs and a counter plan, and then I'll try and get to your plan. So, okay, I just want to thank everybody for being here, and let's just get right to this. First of all, I want to start with a vagueness criticism of this plan. So first of all, they said the LAPD will just accept a Homeland Security grant and that they'll have some restrictions, but they weren't very clear on what the exact restrictions are. When we asked if they could clarify, they just said whenever drones would really be effective, and so their only restriction is really that it's at the police's discretion. So because of this, we don't have the ground or the ability to run things like how it would be effective or where it would be effective or how the police could potentially abuse all this. So I would just say, the judge, you should look out for potential abuse for this, because if they come up here and try and clarify that none of our DAs link because they have this, it's because they weren't clear and that they were vague, so there's potential abuse. So now let's get on to my first DA of abuse / you can call it business as usual. Right now, the police always abuse power when they abuse power a lot. So you can see that minorities are disproportionately affected by police brutality, and that when you give police power, minorities take the brunt out of the status quo. Their viewpoint here is this: drones are just another tool for police to do that with, because we don't know how the restrictions are really going to play out or what the police can really do. Because their standards aren't set or clear, it will just be another way for police to make up excuses and make up reasons and probable cause after the fact, so that they can get these drones used to violate people's privacy and to demean their human dignity. So here's the plan. So either their plan says that they are really limiting, when in fact that would bite into our vagueness critique, because if they limit it and they didn't tell us, we're not able to, or if they were perfectly clear and their laws are just as vague as they want, then the police will abuse that. So here's the D point of impacts are going to be the human dignity of minorities are going to be decreased, because neighborhoods with a large minority population will see that drones are overhead, but when they go to different communities that are more wealthy or richer, they're going to see that very few drones are there. So it's going to increase distrust in the government, and then also increase lawsuits in the government, and take money away from the LAPD to be able to do other things. So my second DA2 is privacy. Right now, the status quo requires probable cause and the Fourth Amendment. Oh, yes, Lasai?
So how would you say exactly that our plan is going to cause police brutality on minorities, like you mentioned?
It wouldn't cause police brutality on minorities, but because the plan doesn't really specify when or you can or can't use these, then police are going to find a way to abuse it and disproportionately affect minorities. Yes, again?
Now, your impact says increase the lawsuits, but for every plan that has been passed like this, that we have seen no lawsuits increase. So what's your warrant for that impact?
My warrant is because once the LA Police Department is really known for corruption, and they have a lot of corruption scandals, and they're probably going to use this, as my DA says, to abuse power. Therefore, they're probably going to get sued at some point or another. And because drones are still in their infancy in police use, that's why we haven't seen them. So my second DA is privacy. That status quo requires probable cause. You have to be able to. You have the right to see your accuser. In many states like California, people have a right to privacy. The B point here is drones get around all that because their plan is unclear. You don't really know when. Like, they'll just say, oh, it was just to speed up, or we thought somebody was in danger. So that's why they'll be abused and people's privacy will be taken away. So it's unconstitutional. The D point here is decreased privacy of citizens. Again, distrust in the government. And then also no solvency, because the plan will be overturned because it's a direct violation of the California state constitution. No more questions at this time. I have to get to all your advantages. So finally, my counter plan is going to be use an alternate agent. And my alternate agent for this same plan is going to be the Forest Service, because it will be able to speed up, like, the ability for people to find, search, and rescue for their mission, but they don't have the same record of police brutality or just hurting minority people. Therefore, they won't bite into the DAs of abusing power and impacting people's privacy, because they will only be able to use it to, like, monitor roads and monitor forest grounds, and they'll skip all that. So, yes, Lasai?
Okay, so the Homeland Security is willing to give grants to the police departments, but they have never been willing to give it to your alternative agents, so how's it going to be funded?
Normal means, because these drones are not actually that expensive on their own, and they won't be in very dangerous locations. So now let's get on to their advantages. First, their advantage one of increasing surveillance. You can say the cops aren't very stealthy, or they're hostage situation intel. I would say this advantage is going to be the vast minority of why these drones are used, because these drones are not going to be used to combat hostage situations that happen very infrequently. They're more likely to be used to hurt, to just spy on minorities and abuse the human rights of these groups of people. So the magnitude of this advantage is very low, and the probability of it being used is also very low. Then they said it would increase efficiency, increase detailed efficiency, search and rescue. But like our counter plan does, we are able to find search and rescue better. We are able to increase that efficiency when it comes to the human rights abusing aspects of their plan. The second advantage too is increasing response time. These drones won't actually increase response time for like police officers, because you still have to send the drone and then you have to send police officers anyway. The drone, since it's not weaponized, can't fight anything. But it will increase response time in like search and rescue operations with the alternate agent of the Forest Service still has. So you can, so there's really no solvency on this point here. And then on the third of environmental, the Forest Service would no longer have to be using helicopters either, so we get that advantage to us. And then they really have no solvency besides that, so thank you.
All right. Off-time roadmap. I'm going to go off case and then on in the same exact order. We think right now that there's racial inequality going on and that there are people who are being hurt who don't have to, and that if we can use technology and surveillance in order to help those people, that's what we should be doing. And so as the government team, we affirm the resolution for this round that this House supports police using drones. And so that's why our plan is the LAPD will be able to use drones. So let's get to this off-case vagueness argument first. It wasn't really structured out, but the main point was that they were saying, at least in the A point, that like by us saying the LAPD is going to accept a grant and like will also be subject to certain restrictions, we didn't necessarily say what those restrictions are, and so that like somehow we should lose the debate for that. But I have three responses. The first one is that like LAPD accepting a grant is not anything tricky or sneaky. That's the normal means of how police departments are getting funding for drones, is from Homeland Security. If we were to do anything else, that would be like totally unorthodox. And then as far as restrictions are concerned, there are restrictions right now put in place by the FAA that govern the use of drones, that we see police departments across the country abiding by those guidelines. But finally, the Prime Minister answered in a POI when it's like, oh, well, when are these going to be used? And like, what are they allowed to be used for? He clearly said, you know, things like search and rescue, hostage situations, drug trafficking, things like that. So I think that we're being really clear on what's going on here. We said the drones aren't weaponized. We said that the LAPD is using them. We told you how they're getting the funding. And so we don't think that there's any abuse going on here. Yes.
To be clear, the government doesn't believe that the police ever circumvents laws that are in place.
Oh, absolutely. Laws that are in place can be circumvented, but our point here is that we told you what the laws are, so we're not being vague. If you want to make arguments about people aren't going to abide by that, go for it. So next is their disadvantage one, titled abuse. Their A point was about sort of police abuse and how it disproportionately affects minority communities. I agree with the setup for this disadvantage, so let's just drop down to the impact level and turn it. Okay, clean turn. So the impacts are, one, that drones are going to, at least that they brought up, that drones are going to decrease dignity of minorities and also take money from the LAPD because they're going to have to fight these lawsuits. But the turn here of increasing the dignity of minorities comes, for example, like let's say that the Ferguson Police Department had drones in the sky, and so they were watching what was happening as Officer Wilson shot down Michael Brown in the street. They would be able to use that footage and then be able to have, so that they can have dignity instead of just having to trust what the officer is saying in front of the grand jury. Yeah.
So are you saying the drones in your plan are going to be so just ever present in the community that they could see like occasional officer interactions with the public.
Yeah, that if there's areas of crime, or that if there's areas where they think that there are going to be crime, like police officers and public safety uses a lot of analytics to see where crime is going to occur. So they're using drones for that now. And so, yeah, so like in Ferguson, for example, that would give Michael Brown, his family, and the African American community who has been systematically abused, that would give them a lot more dignity to actually see what happened. And the turn is that the LAPD is going to have more money because they're going to spend less on lawsuits. Like, for example, things like with the Rodney King riots, or like what happened with OJ, where like when it's like they're proven that they're corrupt, they have to pay out lots of money. So this will make it so that they save more money and can fight crime a lot better. So just a turn on the abuse argument. Drones are going to limit police's ability to abuse minorities and anybody else. Now let's move to privacy. The A point is they're talking about the status quo, how it requires probable cause, and that people have a right to privacy. So my first response, and this is basically to the whole DA, is non-unique. We already use helicopters for surveillance, and this is literally people with their eyes and high-resolution cameras that are able to see whatever they want. So that's already in place. It hasn't been overturned by the California Supreme Court. It has not been ruled unconstitutional. Further, there is no explicit right to privacy within the California state constitution. So the impacts here, if that's going to be overturned because it's a violation of the California Constitution, that we're not going to get solvency, I just think isn't going to happen because A, it's constitutional, and B, even if it is unconstitutional, we already employ unconstitutional means in the environment now that are not overturned. So that DA essentially has no impacts, no offense. Yeah, what's up?
Can you explain to me, or maybe define, how we use helicopters for surveillance?
Yeah, so like, so say either there's someone who's in a high-speed chase or whatever the case is, you have helicopters, shines a light on them, or if it's let's survey an area, that's why you will see helicopters even over LA, that even if there's no specific crime that they're investigating. It's pretty basic. So now let's move to the counterplan. An alternate agent counterplan, how they're going to use the Forest Service that's going to use drones. The funding is going to be normal means. So first of all, I'm just going to perm this as a test of competition. There was no competition brought up. There's no reason that the LAPD and the Forest Service can't use drones. In fact, it seems really likely that once they see that the LAPD is able to do it effectively and that people like it, that the Forest Service is going to be like, we should do that too, also because it helps the environment. So now let's really get to the case responses. On our Advantage 1 of surveillance, they don't respond a whole lot to like our response about like crime and drugs and how surveillance can be really helpful in deterring those things, but they choose to focus on hostage situations. And they say, well, but drones being used for hostage situations, they're really infrequent. And so they're more likely to abuse minorities with these drones than they are to actually solve a hostage situation. And my response is that hostage situations in LA are not infrequent. It's a very densely populated city, and so compared to the rest of the country, they're more likely to have hostage situations than anywhere else. And because we already turned the abusing minorities argument, it means that there's no offense here. So we're just saying hostage situations happen. I don't care if it's one that happens per year. If we can solve one hostage situation per year or make one hostage feel more comfortable that there's surveillance happening, then we get that solvency. Then drop down to the impacts. They say that counterplan solves better. I'm going to turn that and say counterplan doesn't solve better at all. Counterplan wouldn't have anything to do as far as solving impacts of drug trafficking. So already, just like we get a lot more impacts as far as surveillance is concerned. Yeah, I'm in protected time actually. Sorry, and I've already taken like 3 POIs. The next advantage we have about response times, advantage 2, basically they said, well, they're not weaponized, so like, yeah, it's going to help response times, like it'll help police get there quicker and ambulances get places quicker, but they're not going to be able to like shoot a criminal, as he's robbing a store. And we say, yeah, but that's not what we're saying we're solving. We're not saying that we solve crime, we're saying that our solvency is we increase response times and efficiency, and that like ultimately impacts out into increased quality of life. Because if you're being found on a search and rescue mission and you're saved in that regard, that's going to make you a lot happier. But also efficiency as far as like ambulances, especially in a gridlocked city like Los Angeles, where like it can be really difficult. And when seconds matter as far as saving someone's life, drones are the things that are going to do that. Finally, our advantage 3 of the environment, they say that they get that advantage too, and I'm saying that's fine, but we perm out their counterplan. So we get all the solvency in this debate, and we think that we increase quality of life, and we also help racial inequality, and that's why you're going to be voting government today.
I'll go off case first and then back on case. Once again, thank you everyone for being here, to my partner and to my opponents. First thing I'd like to do is discuss my response to the perm. They says we can do both. My first response is, one, our plan doesn't bite into their DAs, so I don't know why you would want to do both. My second response is, by doing both, you now create even more inefficiency and you're going to rise costs. You have drones doing the same thing in 2 different areas. Why? Like, why would they want, if they feel their plan is so good, why do they want to perm? Also, all they want to do is put more drones in the air. If we have drones for search and rescue, and they're saying they have drones for search and rescue, now we have even more drones. So test of competition seems a little bit redundant. And again, nothing we have bites into their DA. My third response is by them attempting to perm, this is just strictly wasteful. Maybe they don't understand the cost of doing anything because of their vagueness plan. They merely, their plan was pretty vague. It's just this grant that comes from Homeland Security. They didn't really discuss dollars, what it discusses. So now moving on to the vagueness critique or DA. They say that this is normal means for Homeland Security, and that's what Homeland Security does, is they just give these grants. And we say, so what? You don't discuss what the grants do, who's going to operate the drones, how the drones are going to be operated. Does the money pay just for the drones? Does the money pay for running the drones? Does the money pay for the training to run the drones? Does the money pay for somebody to fly the drones? Does the money pay for somebody to access the drones and store the data? They just say normal means. They don't really answer this. So we don't really know what normal means are. They gave us no other examples of when Homeland Security has done this in other areas and what they've done in those areas. So again, I would say just saying Homeland Security does this is completely vague. So they definitely bite into that. Let's move on to DA number 1. And obviously, Judge, as they will agree, you can flow down everything from the A point, B point, and C point because they only wanted to discuss the impacts. And that's really what I want to discuss with you. They say that if they want to turn our impacts, and they say that if we had the drones in the air, things like Ferguson wouldn't have happened. My first response is, did they know that Officer Wilson was going to get into a confrontation with Michael Brown that day, and that's why they would have had a drone in the air at that spot? I mean, if that's the case, I would say that's even more likely to abuse minorities because they already know when there's going to be an issue with minorities, so they're focusing merely on minorities. My second response to that is I just think it's almost, comical that the police knew this was going to happen, and that's why they would have a drone in the area. Now, they talk about, in a POI, my partner asked, well, how would they know about these drones? He's like, well, the drones would just be in the air. They would use analytics and stuff like that. So I don't think there's enough drones in the area, unless we're covering every single area, that these drones are really, really making a true impact. And again, analytics are going to probably tell you that more crime happens in minority areas. If more crime happens in minority areas and these drones are focusing on minority areas, then again, we have access that we're actually going to focus more on minorities, which is going to dehumanize minorities even more than they have. They're already uncomfortable with the police, many of them, as we've seen in Ferguson. So now when you put another agent, not only the police, but the police using the drones and focusing on these areas, you're going to see trust go down even more. In response to lawsuits, drones is a fairly new concept. What they can and can't do, what can and can't be collected through drones is a new concept. We are bound to see lawsuits. We see lawsuits every single day. Whether they are frivolous lawsuits or non-frivolous lawsuits, lawsuits still cost money. LAPD has a history of having to defend themselves. Whether we go back to the OJ case, whether we look, currently at some of the corruption within the within the jail system in LAPD, within the police taking advantage of rights. So LAPD in and of themselves has a history of abusing rights, which lead to lawsuits. Let's move on to DA number 2, which is privacy. And they talk about that how we already use helicopters for surveillance. I'm going to turn that. I don't believe we use helicopters for surveillance. We use helicopters as responses to things that have happened. They specifically said, for instance, if there's a high-speed chase going on or something like that, a helicopter responds. So again, this helicopter is not being used for surveillance. The helicopter is being used in response to something that is happening currently. So therefore, these drones, when you just put these drones in the air that aren't responding to crimes, they actually are invading privacy. Again, there's a difference between response time, as they discussed in their advantage number 2, I believe. There's a difference between response time and there's a difference between using something for surveillance. Surveillance is more about gathering data and things like that. Let's move on to, I think I've covered all that. California, privacy. Yeah, and again, we talked about that they have no solvency because it's likelihood that what's gathered from these drones is going to be overturned in court and stuff like that. Again, this bites into the vagueness as well. How long are they going to collect data? How long are they going to use the data? Are they going to go back and get warrants after they've collected the data and say, we have this data, but we now know that a crime's happened, so you're going to see things get kicked out of court. Every time you're sending somebody into court to get warrants based on what you found, that costs money as well. That costs officers. When officers go to court, they actually make overtime, and so that actually costs the LAPD even more. So moving on to the on case. We're going to talk about DA number 1, which is they say we currently have a lack of surveillance. Now, they're big. I would say what they think the drones do the most for us is it helps in hostage situations. My first response to this, I would say this is a non-unique argument because we already have such things as robots in place. We already have cameras that can be put in place by feeding wires and stuff like that, so that drones aren't necessarily the only response to this. We do not necessarily just send officers in blindly anymore. I mean, maybe in some of the 70s movies they were watching, maybe when we were watching SWAT on television, this is what happened. But there are robots that go into hostage situations. There are robots that go and collect intel when hostages are going on. So we already have means in place for doing this. I'll get you at the bottom of my point here. So they say that this is going to increase effective hostage surveillance and stuff like that. And again, I say not necessarily because we already have this. They say this is going to help with search and rescues and forests. I say that bites into the counterplan. Our counterplan is a better means for this because just a forest rescue is focusing on this, which also doesn't bite into the abuse and things like that. Even though I'm protected time, I'll take the question.
Yeah, could you give me one example of where robots were used in a hostage situation?
Absolutely. SWAT currently employs robots that go in and they can go up to doors. They can go in. They can use infrared technology to see how many bodies are in place. These robots can also, through their arms, they can put they have these really thin, almost like tube-like cameras that can be put in place so that you can actually get eyes on the situation. This is technology that's been in place for well over 10 years. Getting on to the DA of response time. Again, as my partner said, this does not increase response time. These drones, have to be put into a situation. I also say this is non-unique in LA because LA has one of the most technologically advanced camera system for traffic anyways. They have traffic control that can actually see every single road, most major intersections, so they're going to know that. My third response to the environment is that, again, because we're using the drones here, that we don't bite into it as much like that. Thank you.
Okay, so just a quick off-time roadmap. I'm just going to go straight voters. So my first voter that I'm going to get to today is vagueness. At my first speech, I talked about this was potential abuse, and it has turned into actual real abuse, so you should be voting for us today. Because we don't know what normal means, they don't tell us what the grant does, what the grant requires. They don't tell us these FAA specifications. First, they talk about the drones only being used in hostage situations, and then they talk about drones being so pervasive that they can watch even Michael Brown get killed. So I don't know when or where these drones are going to come up, so this has led us to, so we don't even know how their plan links into our disadvantages. So, Judge, I don't think you have even the jurisdiction to vote on theirs because they're so vague, or because this. And I'm going to say this is an a priori voter because it's the first thing you have to look at because it restricts our ability to debate, and it took our grant. My second response is abuse. They realized that the LAPD has a history of abuse, and they admitted that police tend to abuse power. And then they gave us a vague plan that doesn't specify when or where these police officers are going to have to use drones, or where drones can and can't be used. So so that just opens it up to abuse because the LAPD is doing this, and because that's their agent, it's going to really abuse. My second voter is going to be, again, decreasing privacy. Since they just gave us no information on the restrictions that when the LAPD that has a history of like circumventing laws is going to use these helicopters, because they could be everywhere, because they could be over Officer Wilson and Michael Brown, because they could be just following all traffic patterns, this is going to really decrease privacy. And then they even admitted that it might be unconstitutional, which it is because the California Supreme Constitution expressly gives Californians the right to privacy. So it's not even good. So they have no way of enforcing this. So they have no solvency, and they decrease privacy. My my third voter, I guess now, is no solvency again. Because this is unconstitutional, because we have robots who can monitor things, because the Forest Service is a better agent, they're not really getting any solvency that our plan isn't getting. Finally, my last voter is going to be plan versus counter plan. Our plan has the Forest Service, an agency that doesn't discriminate, is never in violation of police brutality, is just trying to help people, protect the environment, and help people when they get lost. Do this. There's no, you don't really see any forms of trust. We have no disadvantage associated with our plan. So there's really no reason you shouldn't do ours. And then you have their plan, which incorporates a perm of ours, which increases inefficiency, is super vague, is liable for corruption. It has loopholes left and right for people to go. So that's why I urge you to vote for an opposition ballot. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to step out and get water. Road.
Yeah, yeah. I like it. I think next it should be school support drones makes the kids go to class. Actually, schools actually do have drones. Some do. Well, they
Like high school?
College camps.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Like they have like actual like law enforcement in schools.
Well, we're one step away. We have these little up there things on the things they ride on.
Oh, the segways.
Segways.
Ah.
You can go if you want.
I think. I guess you could watch.
You can just slide. You can just duck underneath you too. Go through the. If it gets out of line, just let me know.
All right. So quick roadmap. I'm gonna go through the opponent's voters. Then I'm gonna go to my voters. Right? Get 5 minutes. Right. So their first voter was vagueness, in which we provided from the beginning saying that these drones were going to be used for the hostage situation, crimes, response times, and emergency situations. So we provided, when asked on when they're going to be used, we provided when they're going to be used. And we provided that it's going to be a grant from Homeland Security, which is a normal means of police departments getting these grants. It's a normal means for getting these weapons. We only have 7 minutes to provide a plan. We can't go through every specific situation on every detail, in which the normal lease just solves for that itself. So there's no vagueness in voting. You're not going to vote vague. Number two, for the abuse, they trying to win by the abuse of the minorities. However, when we've said that there has been like no empirical evidence or any warrants provided saying how any police department has used drones to provide abuse against minorities, in which we see that that is not a significant impact from happening. So you're not going to want to vote for something that has no evidence or warrants at all. And also when we turn that argument saying how that drones can be used to help the minorities, where if there's some type of situation, some type of crime, some type of riot and protest, these drones can be used in surveillance. And if a cop does anything potentially abuseful, that can be used for evidence against the cops. And when we provide that turn and they don't return that, especially in the voters, you're going to take our golden turn against their DA1. So their DA1 is another advantage for our plan. And so when they talk about the privacy on how you should vote for that, you're not going to want to vote for that privacy DA, because that is something that's just not unique. Helicopters already are using, and helicopters already surveillance on people, and there has been no distrust in the government. There has been no lawsuits at all. When there's high pursuits on the freeway, helicopters are there. When there's hostage situation, helicopters are also there. When there's people, even for even like search and seizures, the helicopters fly over the forest. So helicopters are used many times throughout the day. When I go outside, even just for anecdotal evidence, you see helicopters flying over. You don't know why it's there, but you know it's there. You don't call up the police department and say, hey, I want to file a lawsuit because I feel I'm being abused on my privacy rights. I'm outside, not trying to be watched by a helicopter. So no, there's no disadvantage to this privacy at all, because it's not unique. No one complains about helicopters and surveillance. So there's something you're not going to want to vote for, especially when our plan provides so much solvency. Their number three voter is that there's no solvency, which we provide so many warrants from police departments saying that these drones actually solve for hostage situation, increasing effectiveness. And they solve for faster response time for firefighters and ambulances. So when we provide all these warrants, I don't know where the opposition comes saying that there's no solvency. When they provide no warrants or evidence saying that there isn't solvency, it's kind of overwhelming to try to vote for the opposition when the government just provides nothing but warrants. So you're not going to vote there. In the counter plan, you're not going to vote there because we earned it. There was no competition in the constructive speech. And so they can work together to provide more solvency. So you're going to go for this for double solvency, in which we get both solvency. Plus, they're different funding, so they're trying to talk about cost, but affecting cost. Your plan is the only one affecting cost because our comes from an actual grant, in which yours doesn't come from any type of grant. So that's just more hurtful. But we're still going to perm that anyway. So now when we go to our bonus and why we won, one, we should vote for us because of the perm. We get double solvency for all the arguments I made beforehand. Number two, there's no DA to vote against for it because the first DA is empirically designed and has no warrants, and plus we turn it and they drop the turn in the voters. So when we get the golden turn, there's only going to vote for our golden turn if our plan increase the helping the minorities in. So that's another advantage for our plan. Plus their DA2 is completely non-unique with the helicopters already doing surveillance over people for when there's crimes being committed or any type of pursuit chase. Helicopters called out to do surveillance, and obviously people are captured on that surveillance, and there has been no lawsuits. Also, that's another reason why, because there has been no lawsuits against even drones, and they say yes, drones are new. That drones have been used for the past 3 years by police departments, and there has been no lawsuits over any type of privacy concerns or lawsuits concerns. So we're not going to really see any strong magnitude from these impacts. And voter number three, there are advantage one still stands because we provided actual warrants saying how it's going to help a hostage situation, how it can help for drug trafficking because of things like being stealthy, not being so large, and it's going to be used their high techniques like infrared, heat sensors, and radar, so how that can help locate. They completely drop the drug trafficking. And we also still get the search and seizure, but double solvency because we burn. And we have actual warrants saying that hostage situations are effective with drones. They have no warrants saying that they're not effective. Same thing for advantage number two when we look into our emergency response times.
Point of order.
Yeah.
Search and seizure is a new argument.
I said that in my first constructive speech. I said it's going to increase search and seizure with the infrared, heat sensors, and radar. One of my impacts. There's the
I
forest.
think the
There was the
confusion
forest
here
and
is search and seizure versus search and
You
Oh,
have
yeah,
no
yeah,
access to
yeah.
search and seizure.
Oh, yeah.
All right, point well taken.
Point well taken, right? And we get the search and rescue, in which double firm on that. And also advantage number two, they just said that no, it's not going to help increase the response times, which they provide no warrants say it's not going to help, but we do provide warrants saying it will help. And advantage number three, we get environmental because their client can't solve for all of it.